Hello, I'm Glenda Chong.
And I'm Steve Lai.
And also ahead, a climate report by over 500 scientists from around the world. So how did Earth fare last year? Well, not well, apparently. I'll tell you more later.
Sarah Colley has the business news, and earnings season for Singapore banks in full swing, Sarah.
Yes, Steve. Now, Southeast Asia's biggest lender, DBS, missed expectations, posting a 20% jump in second quarter profit, sending its shares down 1.6%.
Well, first up tonight, ASEAN and China have reached a significant milestone in talks on the South China Sea Code of Conduct, or COC. Singapore's Foreign Minister Vivian Balakrishnan says that both parties have agreed on a single draft COC negotiating text, which will form the basis for future negotiations. Mr. Balakrishnan was speaking on day 2 of the 51st ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting here in Singapore. ASEAN members held ministerial talks with their dialogue partners, including China, Japan and Russia, and it was North Korea that featured heavily on the agenda. China has called for the establishment of a peace mechanism for the Korean Peninsula. Now let's go over to Nurshida Othman, who's been following the day's events. And Shah, Chinese State Councillor Wang Yi, he just spoke to reporters. Give us some highlights of what he said.
Well, Glenda, Mr. Wang Yi said that ties between ASEAN and China have grown from strength to strength, and China vows to continue to cooperate with the bloc, especially in the areas of digital innovation and people-to-people program. On the issue of the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea, he highlighted that both sides have successfully arrived at the single draft negotiating text, as you mentioned earlier. He describes it as building a house together with a single designed, good groundwork and strong pillars. Have a listen.
那么下一步，我们将进入非常具体的案文的磋商。我想，只要没有外界的干扰 ，COC 的磋商将会加速向前推进。那么，事实将会证明，我和东盟国家，我们完全有能力共同维护好南海地区的和平与稳定。 我们完全有智慧，可以达成一份我们共同遵守的地区规则。
Now, on the issue of the looming trade war with the U.S., Mr. Wang Yi was asked if he would come back to the negotiating table. He said that the U.S. is running against the trend of times and that tariffs will hurt the people of both countries. Now, he urged U.S. policymakers to listen to the voice of the U.S. business and international community. Glenda, Steve.
Shah, we know as well that Singapore Foreign Minister Vivian Balakrishnan also spoke to reporters earlier. What did he say?
Well, Dr. Vivian released an early joint communique outlining all of the discussions over the last 2 days, and this is considered surprising as it's well ahead of time. Now, on the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea, he talked about how negotiations are not over at this point, and he said that the COC is not established to resolve territorial disputes. He also said that it's very premature at this point to set a deadline on when negotiations will be complete.
A lot of this depends on the establishment of mutual confidence, good faith and goodwill on the part of all parties. And this clearly is a dynamic, evolving situation. So I would say that right now, if you ask me, I think everyone is glad that we've reached this stage. Everyone also hopes that we'll be able to accelerate the process, but we're not yet in a position to put a specific deadline. And in the nature of these negotiations, sometimes it's better to maintain sufficient flexibility so that nobody feels locked in or that their interests will be overridden in a roughshod manner.
Now, talks between ASEAN and its dialogue partners will continue over the next 2 days. Now, on Saturday, there'll be the East Asia Summit as well as the ASEAN Regional Forum, which will involve participation from all the countries, including the U.S. and North Korea. Glenda, Steve, back to you.
Yeah, many thanks for that. Nurshida Othman there speaking to us from the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting here in Singapore.
Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong also spoke today at the opening ceremony of the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting.
He said that ASEAN must continue to strengthen its regional architecture amid growing geopolitical uncertainties. Mr. Lee said this is the only way for the regional bloc to remain relevant, as a FIFA RFN reports.
Addressing foreign ministers from around the region, Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong highlighted two key areas where the regional bloc can do more together. This includes deepening economic integration as trade tensions escalate between the United States and other ASEAN dialogue partners like China, Canada and the European Union.
The rules-based multilateral trading system, which has underpinned ASEAN's growth and prosperity, is under pressure. It's important that ASEAN continues to support the multilateral system and work with like-minded partners to deepen our web of cooperation. I'm glad that ASEAN countries are redoubling their efforts to conclude the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, by the end of the year.
The RCEP, which comprises ASEAN and 6 of its free trade partners, is said to be the world's largest trading bloc, covering a third of the world's annual GDP. Now, ASEAN is also working with the EU on a comprehensive air transport agreement, a first of such a deal between 2 major regional groupings. But Mr. Lee warned that negotiations will not be easy, especially with the growing mood of nationalism and protectionism in many countries. Mr. Lee also called on ASEAN to build up its digital connectivity and hopes that the 26 participating cities of the ASEAN Smart Cities Network can establish a common framework for the smart city development in the region. Singapore will also enhance its support for the Initiative for ASEAN Integration.
We will upgrade the 3 Initiative for ASEAN Integration centers in Vietnam, in Cambodia and in Laos to become Singapore Cooperation Centers. The new centers will expand our range of technical assistance and offer new modalities for capacity building that go beyond classroom training.
Mr. Lee said Singapore hopes to work with members to build an innovative and resilient ASEAN for future generations. Afifa Arifin, Channel News Asia, Singapore.
And Sarah Caldi is also up ahead with the day's business headlines.
Yes, with the banking sector in focus today, Sarah.
Yes, Steve, now a report finds that about 9 in 10 financial institutions are going digital. We'll have analysis after this break. Time for your business news. Southeast Asia's biggest lender, DBS, has reported a 20% jump in second quarter profit. Now, it stood at about $1 billion, which is slightly below market expectations of $1.05 billion. Now, the bank said that the impact of higher business volume was moderated by weak trading performance. Now, let's take a look at DBS shares because they were under pressure following the results announcements. It ended the day lower by 1.6%. Brandon Tenocho has more.
Now, Singapore's largest lender, DBS, today posted a 20% increase in its second quarter net profit, supported by higher net interest income and fee income. However, this missed estimates because analysts polled by Bloomberg were expecting a higher net profit of about $1.1 billion. Now, net interest margin, which is a key gauge of a bank's profitability, came in at 1.85%. That's up 11 basis points from 1.74% a year earlier. Now, in fact, DBS is expecting a 1 to 2 basis points increase for the full year on the back of 2 expected rate hikes coming from the US Federal Reserve. Now, despite the positive results seen today, the outlook for DBS going forward remains especially cautious. Now, DBS is expecting loan growth to be reduced, mostly to trade loans, and it's obvious why. Now, that's because the mounting trade tensions between the US and China could potentially disrupt trade flows and supply chains. And now that in turn would have a negative impact on business decisions and business sentiments worldwide. Now, earlier during the results briefing, DBS CEO Mr. Piyush Gupta said the biggest problem with the trade tensions is the spillover effects. Now, he coined the confidence issues as well as market psychology issues could impact what happens to the equity market, the yield curve, and credit spreads in the region. Now, for the bank, that means that it's not the fundamental core business that gets impacted, but rather the treasury market business. But the scale of that impact is still uncertain. Now, another downside for loan growth comes from the impact of the recently announced property cooling measures. Now, during the briefing, Mr. Gupta also said he sees a slowdown in the consumer mortgage book. The bank initially anticipated putting on about 4 billion Singapore dollars, but with the slowdown and given what happened with the last set of property curbs, he's anticipating that the bank would probably give up about $500 million Singapore dollars of new loan bookings in the second half of this year. However, analysts have said that DBS is not likely to be hit very significantly because compared to its peers, UOB and OCBC, DBS has the least exposure to housing loans among them. UOB, on the other hand, is the most exposed. And experts say there will be a good cushion for DBS and investors considering DBS's attractive dividend yield and its cheap valuation. Now, other key financial metrics to note include return of equity coming in higher at 11.8 compared to 10.1 a year earlier. On the dividends front, the bank has declared its first half dividends at 60 Singapore cents per share, up from 33 Singapore cents per share a year earlier. Now, DBS is the first of Singapore's 3 major banks to post its second quarter earnings results, with UOB to follow tomorrow and OCBC next Monday. Brandon Tenocho, Channel News Asia, Singapore.
Now, DBS is one of several banks that have been pushing for a digital transformation. A survey done by EY says that about 9 in 10 financial institutions, or 87% in Southeast Asia and Hong Kong, are on their way to digitalization. And it's not just banks. Insurance payments and asset management companies are also on board. Now, the report also found that financial institutions in Malaysia are leading in digital adoption. 36% of them have fully embraced digital. Now, Vietnam follows, and Singapore, Hong Kong, and Thailand. Now, digital innovation is being tapped to improve customer service, cost savings, and efficiencies. Banks have also partnered with fintech startups to pool their skills together. Yet, EY points that such collaborations can still yield more value. Now, for more on this, we're joined by ASEAN Financial Services Leader at EY, Brian Tung. Now, Brian, thanks for joining us this evening. Now, what makes Malaysia's financial institutions stand out?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me on the show. I think the numbers that came out based on the survey findings also quite intrigued us. You would expect to think that city economies like Singapore and Hong Kong to be ahead. But I think that the study does show that the Malaysian institutions, financial institutions, are going quite heavily into this new wave of innovation, and rightly so. And I think perhaps to explain that a little bit more, when we did a bit of analysis, perhaps the higher aspirational goals and advanced goals for Singapore and Hong Kong, that I think perhaps made the respondents think of higher goals, and therefore they responded accordingly, perhaps on the conservative side.
But how do banks from different countries in Southeast Asia approach digital transformation?
Great question. I think if you look at it in the survey, there's both city economies and larger geographical footprints, and therefore you're going to have to think about the concept of the unbanked in the larger geographical economies. For city economies like Singapore and Hong Kong, they're largely there. There's obviously the bread and butter branches and the interactions. But for the rest, financial inclusion comes into the picture. And when you look at the different approaches, these approaches range from cloud services, web services, data analytics, and also the state of the mobile services in country. And perhaps also the use of offshore management services. So I would say that these would be the different approaches.
Yeah, so different needs, different ways of using technology. But what are some of the barriers to successful implementation of these plans? Because different banks may have put forward several of their plans to go digital.
Yeah, I think essentially there are, the issue of legacy systems in many of these financial institutions. The worry or the concern about integrating such systems with newer technology and with the digital footprint, that causes certain concerns in regards to making sure that things work as they ought to be. But more than that, there's also the issue of perhaps having an inadequate amount of talent within the organizations and the skill sets. In-house, that is. And I think on that score, if you look at the Singapore example, government agencies such as the IBF, they're looking at ways and means to upgrade, upskill, reskill some of the existing tasks or roles that they have in financial institutions.
Yeah, the human component always different there. Yeah, and we're talking about banks, payment companies, but they could be up against tech giants like Alipay, for example, in China. So what role will tech companies play in the financial world? And do you think there'll be consolidation because of this?
Well, I think in terms of the findings of the survey and what we've determined from our interaction with industry, it's more of collaboration. There's a lot more intent to work with the big tech companies, and even though they do see them as potentially as a threat, I think the key here is to ensure that there's the ability to utilize those skills and talent that the tech companies would have, maybe bring them in-house, create some kind of in-house incubation labs, which then have certain benefits, which means that there will be a greater result in improving our speed to service customers. There will be a better way to capture insights from the data in collaboration with the big tech companies. And ultimately, we feel that that means a creation of cheaper, better, and more tailored products and services to the end customer.
Yeah. So we've got a recent cyber attack here in Singapore on SingHealth. It has raised security concerns amid a big push really by different industries to go digital. What do you think the finance industry can learn from this?
I think the finance industry is very clear about cyber security and the threat of technology in regards to obviously customer data, client information. The very nature of the evolution of technology creates further complications, but ultimately the solution here is that major and many financial institutions are planning to have more collaboration with their peers, better leverage the ecosystem to share data on such external cyber attacks, and ultimately in-house they are starting to use more AI and analytics to, for example, in privileged access management and identity and access management to better improve transaction monitoring.
All right. Thanks for that, Brian. Brian Tung there from EY.
Thank you.
And I'll have more business headlines later in the hour.
We'll come back to you then. Thanks very much for that, Sarah. Still ahead also as well on Primetime Asia. The capital of Zimbabwe was all quiet today following violent protests on Wednesday. We'll have the latest reaction to the election when we come back. Myanmar continues to grapple with weeks of heavy monsoon rains that have flooded 4 provinces across the country. At least a dozen people have been killed, while around 150,000 others have been forced from their homes.
Rescue teams are trying to reach villages by boat to provide supplies to an estimated 28,000 people who are either unable or unwilling to evacuate. But things could get worse.
State media says that 36 dams and reservoirs are overflowing. And with Myanmar only just entering the peak of the monsoon season, there are fears that fresh rains could spell disaster. Young Wei Kit has more for us from Yangon.
The priority right now is for the authorities to be able to identify where the flood victims are. And these are people who are in their homes, likely because they're unwilling to leave their homes amid the floods or because nobody knows where they are. So the priority is for the authorities to locate these people. The second priority is, of course, to ensure that the temporary camps are properly run, that there's enough food, clean drinking water, as well as sanitary conditions for these people who are living in the temporary shelters. Now, earlier, ASEAN had written to Myanmar saying that it is ready to help the flood victims by providing humanitarian or relief items. In fact, the ASEAN's Disaster Management Unit, the AHA Center, has already deployed a local team to buy items in Myanmar for the flood victims. Earlier, the Myanmar government has also said that it's identified a number of farmlands that have been destroyed by the floods and that there are already plans to be rolled out to help these farmers get on with their lives once the monsoon season is over.
Now let's take a quick look at other stories also making news tonight. Cambodia's Prime Minister has lashed out at the election boycott by the now dissolved opposition Cambodia National Rescue Party. Hun Sen called it a stupid act and a miscalculation. The ruling CPP claims to have taken all 125 parliament seats in Sunday's election, but rights groups have criticized it as flawed. CPP says the large voter turnout of 82% is proof of the country's sound democratic process. The CNRP was dissolved last year and 118 members were banned from politics for 5 years.
The streets of the Zimbabwean capital, Harare, were quiet today following at least 3 opposition protesters being killed in a military crackdown after Monday's election. The international community has called for the government to exercise restraint. Demonstrations broke out after official results showed the ruling ZANU-PF party had won the most seats in parliament, with the opposition claiming the polls were rigged. The vote is the first since the removal of longtime leader Robert Mugabe.
Australian Senator Sarah Hanson-Young is bringing a landmark defamation case against a male senator for making sexually offensive remarks towards her. During a parliament debate over a ban on the use of pepper spray, Senator David Leonheim heckled Ms. Young, telling her to stop, well, quote, stop shagging men. Anything said in the chamber is protected from legal action, but Mr. Leonheim repeated the same remarks to the media. And it's the first time in Australia's history that a sitting politician has filed a defamation suit against another. Still to come, the world is heating up to record temperatures as the effects of climate change are felt globally. We'll have the full report after the break. Welcome back to Primetime Asia. If you're just joining us, here's a reminder of our top stories this hour. Myanmar is continuing to grapple with weeks of heavy monsoon rains that have flooded 4 provinces across the country. At least 11 people have been killed, while nearly 150,000 others have been forced from their homes. Now, state media says that 36 dams and reservoirs are overflowing as the country is only entering the peak of the monsoon season, and there are fears that fresh rains could spell disaster. ASEAN and China have reached a significant milestone in talks on the South China Sea Code of Conduct, or COC. Singapore's Foreign Minister Vivian Balakrishnan says that both parties have agreed on a single draft COC negotiating text, which will form the basis for future negotiations. Foreign Minister Wang Yi says that without any disturbances from the outside, COC consultation will accelerate. And North Korea also on the agenda today at the 51st ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting being held here in Singapore. And China has called for the establishment of a peace mechanism for the Korean Peninsula, as well as denuclearization. And Wang Yi says that he hopes the US and North Korea will maintain contact and resolve any outstanding issues. And to tell us more on this, we're speaking to Dr. Lim Tai Wei, Senior Lecturer at the Singapore University of Social Sciences and Adjunct Research Fellow at the East Asia Institute at NUS.
Yeah, Tai Wei, thanks for coming in and speaking with us. Firstly, China seems to be very keen to take the lead with North Korea and denuclearization, calling for a peace mechanism to be in place as well. What role does China sort of want here?
China has a very big role because it's really the only substantial partner or ally that North Korea has. As you can see from the recent Trump-Kim summit, China provided the air transportation tool for him to come down to Singapore. And also China has been trying to integrate North Korea, Pyongyang, into the regional economy. And I think there's an upcoming ASEAN event where North Korea may be invited to attend. So I think these are all chances for North Korea to sort of open up and integrate with the community and perhaps normalize some of the exchanges that has taken place. But of course, this is with caution in the background, where the US is saying maintain the sanctions until there is a CVID, complete verifiable, irreversible denuclearization. So it remains to be seen how this rapprochement can eventually be translated to concrete measures in which North Korea can reintegrate into the regional economy.
All right, another topic that was discussed today as well was the South China Sea Code of Conduct. And Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan said that, there is now a draft to start this negotiating for this Code of Conduct mechanism. Do you think ASEAN and China will be able to eventually reach an agreement?
I think this is probably the biggest takeaway for today. The most significant thing is that there's now a single draft. Previously, there were several drafts, but now all the points have been consolidated into a single draft for the Code of Conduct. This will become the foundation in which further negotiations can take place. And if you read through some of the comments, even during the SOM meeting, senior officials meeting before this AAM ministerial meetings, there have also been some kind of measures taken. For example, the testing out of emergency emergency hotlines between the different countries that are stakeholders in the South China Sea. So today's milestone is definitely a step forward. There's still a long road ahead, but it's moving in the the correct directions for all parties concerned.
Trade is always something that gets brought up in these sorts of meetings and is of mutual interest to all parties. Did we see China sort of taking a bigger step forwards, perhaps, given that the US and Donald Trump have pulled out of the TPP?
Since the beginning of July this year, there's been a lot of enthusiasm for RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, and announcements have been made from places like Tokyo and Singapore to achieve some kind of progress by the end of this year, 2018. And this takes place against the context of the trade wars that are going on, and also increasing populism and protectionism that has been perceived in some parts of the world. And so these kinds of free trade agreement might be some form of guarantee for free trade advocates to hold on to in terms of institutional platforms. CPTPP is another institutional platform which is trying to push for free trade in the region. So we are seeing a number of initiatives, including over the summer. We also saw the EU signing the free trade agreement with Japan. And all these sort of initiatives help to sort of push free trade forward in an era where there's a lot of anti-globalization forces at work.
All right, speaking of RCEP, do you think we're going to see some proposals by the end of this year? Perhaps, maybe. If not, what do you think are some of the main hurdles to this?
In the July statements that were made by leaders and officials from countries involved in RCEP, seems like pretty much quite a substantial progress has been made. The three kind of obstacles that remain that were mentioned by the stakeholders are perhaps e-commerce, agricultural sector, and also intellectual property rights. So these are some of the hold-ups that are affecting RCEP. Probably the parties concerned will focus on these kinds of obstacles ahead, but it seems like much progress has been made this year. Some optimism can be detected by the month of July. We have to wait till the end of the year 2018 to see whether the optimism translates into concrete progress forward.
And how do you see ASEAN sort of dealing with sort of the two big powers then, China on the one hand that seems to be getting more and more involved in Southeast Asia, and the US that seems to almost be withdrawing?
ASEAN, I think, seems to be doing quite well. In the sense that it's engaging all the major powers. During the Shangri-La dialogue, you have heard India mentioning ASEAN centrality, even in the Indo-Pacific strategy. ASEAN is working with China in Belt and Road Initiative. ASEAN is also continuing its very strong engagement with existing partners like the United States and Japan as well. So I think ASEAN is really becoming, in some sense, a hub for at least for issues like free trade, connectivity, and also the latest proposal that was brought up by Singapore when it was chairing the ASEAN meetings, which was the linking up of smart cities within ASEAN. So I think all this focus on, particularly on the latter item, on innovation and creativity, will push ASEAN forward in terms of both its integration within the ASEAN Economic Community that was formed quietly in 2015 December, as well as its kind of continuing engagement with all major partners in terms of in the technological field, in the smart cities field, in an era where AI and robotics seems to hold a lot of potential for economic development.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming in and speaking with us. Dr. Lim Tai Wei, Senior Lecturer at the University of Social Sciences and Adjunct Research Fellow at the East Asian Institute at National University of Singapore.
Now let's take a quick look at other stories also making the news tonight. US President Donald Trump has thanked North Korean leader Kim Jong-un for sending the remains of American soldiers killed in the Korean War back to the US. They were received by Vice President Mike Pence at the Pearl Harbor military base in Hawaii. North Korea's leader promised to return the remains during his summit with Mr. Trump in Singapore in June. And once the cases of bone fragments are open, they will go through a painstaking process of identification that could take months, if not years.
3 foreign nationals working in the Afghan capital of Kabul have been abducted and killed by militants. Reports say the 3 men from India, Malaysia and Macedonia were working with Sodexo, food and catering company. Police say they found identity cards beside the bodies and are awaiting confirmation from the company.
2 witnesses have testified that invoices tied to former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort appear to be fake. And it's the first time prosecutors have disclosed the invoices, which appear to bill a company tied to Mr. Manafort. They contain spelling and address errors and missing information. Now, it's unclear who created the invoices and how they were used. Mr. Manafort has been charged with fraud offenses and failing to report foreign bank accounts. He's pleaded not guilty to all charges.
More than 50 homes are being threatened by the Milepost 90 fire that has been sweeping through Washington state since Tuesday. The wildfire has already affected over 11,000 acres, prompting evacuation orders to be issued. Firefighters have only managed to contain 30% so far because of strong winds. In California, firefighters are finally gaining control over raging fires that killed 6 people and that have been destroying land for more than a week.
New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who recently gave birth, is back at work after 6 weeks of maternity leave. Ms. Arden is working from home in Auckland until the weekend, and she will then move to the capital, Wellington. Ms. Arden's partner, Clark Gayford, who hosts a television fishing show, plans to be a stay-at-home dad and the main caregiver for their daughter. Ms. Arden is only the second world leader to give birth while in office, and the other was former Pakistani Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto back in January 1990.
From heat waves in Canada and Japan to wildfires in Greece and the United States, climate change has wreaked havoc all over the world in the past year. The annual State of the Climate Report by the American Meteorological Society says 2017 was the hottest year on record, and that's without an El Nino to affect temperatures. Ice extent in the Arctic was at its lowest in the 37-year satellite record. The Arctic also experienced warmth not seen in the past 2,000 years, with some regions 3 to 4 degrees hotter than usual. Antarctic sea ice was below average throughout 2017, and for the 38th consecutive year, ice glaciers continued to lose mass. Meanwhile, global average sea levels were at a 25-year high. The warm sea temperatures are taking a significant toll on the world's coral reefs, causing extensive coral bleaching. Temperatures are expected to rise by more than 2 degrees Celsius by 2050 unless fossil fuel emissions are significantly reduced. So what does this mean for us? A 2.1% increase in deaths for every 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature. It's estimated that by 2099, 1.5 million more people will die each year worldwide due to increased heat. The economy will be severely impacted by climate change as well. Losses from climate change are projected to reach up to 19% of GDP in certain regions by 2030. Experts estimate that the world must invest an additional $460 billion every year over the next 12 years to ensure the rise in temperature is kept within 1.5 degrees Celsius. Earlier, we spoke to Professor Rodney Keenan from the University of Melbourne, who explained how cities can and are tackling climate change.
While some national governments are dragging their feet on climate change and not implementing the transitions we need as quickly as we would like, we are seeing significant action at the city level in many cases. It's cities and local governments that are actually kind of driving action on climate change through a whole range of measures in changing the way that they obtain their energy, integrating more green infrastructure and other types of parks, green spaces into their cities to avoid the impacts of climate change, and changing transportation systems and other mechanisms too.
Still to come on Primetime Asia, another speed bump for China's Belt and Road Initiative as Myanmar decides to scale back its plans. I'll tell you more after the break.
Welcome back. Another speed bump for China's Belt and Road Initiative. Myanmar has scaled back plans for a Chinese-backed port on its western coast, according to a Reuters report. The cost of the project has since been sharply reduced after concerns it could leave Myanmar heavily indebted. The Truckpue deepwater port initially had a price tag of $7.3 billion. It will be on the western tip of conflict-torn Rakhine State. The port was meant to have 10 berths, but it will be revised to just 2. The project's costs sparked concerns after reports of troubled Chinese-backed projects in Sri Lanka and Pakistan. But the Myanmar government has to tread carefully in renegotiating the deal. The country has received diplomatic support from Beijing amid Western criticism over the Rakhine crisis. Elsewhere in business this hour, Singapore Airlines budget arm Scoot is set to raise fares as fuel prices surge from September 1st. The airline says fares will increase by about 5% or between $3.5 and $22, depending on flight duration. Rising oil prices have pushed up fuel expenditure by over 30% year on year. Google has set up a job hunting service in Singapore. The feature is directly built into its search engine. It will create a listing of jobs pulled from more than 1,500 sites, including government job matching portal My Careers Future and recruitment agency Randstad. When users do a search for job roles or skills, relevant information on available positions will pop up. However, job seekers will have to apply directly through the website that first posted the position. The feature was introduced in the United States last year, and the launch in Singapore is its first in Southeast Asia. China's H&A Group has announced management changes, which include the appointment of a new chief investment officer. Current chief executive Adam Tan has been named chairman of H&A International, a post previously held by late H&A Group chairman Wang Jian. Dennis Chen will serve as H&A Group's chief investment officer and executive chairman of H&A International. The moves are to refocus around the group's core aviation and tourism and logistics businesses. Growing up a strong partnership, Starbucks and Alibaba's food delivery platform Alarmy have confirmed a coffee delivery tie-up in China. Starbucks is trying to stem a sales slowdown in its second-largest market, as well as a battle with domestic coffee startups. Well, just last week, Starbucks announced a 2% slide in quarterly same-store sales. The delivery program will commence service in September from 150 Starbucks stores across Beijing and Shanghai. And that's your business update this hour, guys.
Yep, thanks for that, Sarah. So to come here on Primetime Asia, we'll have a roundup of all sporting action. Plus, there were some screams of delight in China as Neymar touched down. As he joins his PSG teammates, tell you what he's up to when we come back. Former Manchester City playmaker Samir Nasri has failed in his appeal against a doping ban. Instead, his punishment has been increased to 18 months, triple the original 6-month sanction. The Frenchman was found guilty of receiving an intravenous drip treatment at a clinic in Los Angeles in 2016. The substance used was a prohibited method in accordance with the World Anti-Doping Agency prohibited list. Nasri's new ban will be backdated to the 1st of July of last year. He will be allowed to return to training with any football club at the start of this November.
Now, Pierluigi Collina, UEFA's chief refereeing officer, has stepped down. The shaven-headed former Italian referee is leaving his post for personal reasons. Collina has served 8 years in European football's governing body, and he's also head of FIFA's refereeing committee, where he has been a firm supporter of the video assistant referee system, also VAR. The technology was used at last month's World Cup for the first time. UEFA, on the other hand, has decided not to use VAR during the upcoming Champions League season. UEFA President Alexandre Ceferin says the new technology still needs more time to be developed. There was no suggestion, however, that UEFA's refusal to use VAR was behind Collina's decision to vacate his seat. Collina will be replaced by compatriot Roberto Rossetti, also a former international referee.
Arsenal keeper Petr Cech has led the Gunners to victory over his former club Chelsea as the London clubs met in their International Champions Cup match in Dublin. A corner from Cesc Fabregas, headed in by Antonio Rudiger, put Chelsea ahead in the 5th minute. Barely 10 minutes later, Arsenal gave away a penalty when Hector Bellerin brought down Callum Hudson-Odoi. Alvaro Morata took the penalty, but it was kept out by Cech. Chelsea remained in the lead till the 90th minute when Alexander Lacazette equalised for Arsenal. The match then went to a penalty shootout, and Ruben Loftus-Cheek had his shot saved by Cech. Alex Iwobi had no problem beating Chelsea's substitute keeper Marcin Bulka to give Arsenal a 6-5 win on penalties. This is the Gunners' second straight win in the tournament. They beat Paris Saint-Germain 5-1 last week.
Now, dozens of screaming fans came out to greet Neymar as he flew into China to rejoin Paris Saint-Germain in their pre-season matches. The Brazilian star appears to have put his disastrous World Cup performance behind him, signing autographs and posing for pictures as he made his way through the airport arrivals hall. Neymar is expected to play in Saturday's French Super Cup game against Monaco, which will mark his first match for PSG in more than 5 months after suffering a foot injury in late February. His arrival comes amidst the controversy surrounding the 26-year-old's apology for his World Cup play acting through a Gillette ad. But the enthusiastic welcome, now it suggests that his popularity in China remains very much intact.
For all the extreme fitness junkies out there, take a look at this. The 2018 Crossfit Games has kicked off in the United States with the aim of finding the fittest on Earth. Hundreds of athletes across the world have gathered in Wisconsin for the sole purpose of putting themselves through a series of physically demanding workouts over the course of 4 days.
And two-time winner Matt Fraser and Tia-Claire Toomey are looking to defend their fittest on Earth titles after strong performances on the first day of competition. So day one saw the athletes compete in 4 events.
First up was the criterium, where they cycled 10.2-kilometer laps as quickly as possible, followed by 30 muscle-ups for time, then a series of heavy weightlifting, where athletes completed a maximum back squat, shoulder press and deadlift before the day capped off with a grueling marathon row, which saw competitors complete 42 kilometers on a rowing machine within 4 hours. Athletes will take a break today to recover from those events, and will return to the stadium on Friday for more as yet undisclosed challenges.
Okay, that just sounds so painful, what you just described there, but I believe you can do it, Steve.
No, I wish I could be. These guys are serious athletes. I mean, CrossFit has developed and evolved into something, well, that has a CrossFit Games. And you see the disciplines that they have to be sort of get across, from rowing to cycling to these muscle-ups. There's a bit of gymnastics involved.
I don't think I can do that.
There's so much athleticism. You need to carry your own body weight. And then you have these sort of Olympic-style lifts as well. There's a deadlift for you.
And then there's rowing.
Yeah, you just have to be good at everything. Your cardio has to be good. Your muscular strength,
You're fit enough. You can do this. I'll back you. You can do this. Oh, forget about that. I mean, forget about that. I can do that.
I wish. Anyway, lots to work towards, yes. I suppose.
Thanks for your company here on Primetime Asia. As usual, you can find us